Hey, it's Soul, with a blank wall behind me and many words to say about what could make the world of Warcraft greater. Please consider subscribing to the channel for more of these feedback video essay kind of like things and all things Warcraft. Professions in the world of Warcraft, that's where I would try to throw in some animation, maybe against the wall, where I would present a Google search box and we would see a bunch of phrases that autocomplete like, professions in the world of Warcraft, ... are worthless. They have no meaning. Were better before Bobby Kotick. Were better before Ian Hazacostas. Are they still a thing? I mean, I could go on, and eventually I would hit every demographic, every playstyle. But here's one gesture that I think most of us share. Professions in the world of Warcraft don't have a lot going for it at the moment. I find this to be mostly true, but let's begin this video/podcast with what professions do have going for it. Professions enable gold to exchange hands. While individually, some professions perform much better than others, overall they excel at encouraging the trading of gold, it's also to say that they do the absolute bare minimum of what they're supposed to do. Professions are core to the World of Warcraft economy, and in Shadowlands, that is, at this moment, they are required to produce legendary gear, which makes them indispensable. I know not every profession makes legendaries, but bear with me here. The current system is staying afloat, and there were some huge changes done to them for Shadowlands, but in the context of my upcoming criticism, these changes don't mean a damn thing. Here are two of my major critiques about WoW professions that I think cover most of the problems that we share. Number one, World of Warcraft's professions don't have a strong sense of identity or interaction in the game. I dare to even say that by its very design, it doesn't fulfill the roleplay aspect very well at all. And number two, throughout WoW's history and especially in today's game, World of Warcraft's professions have been all but pushed aside in favor of rewards that come from organized raids and rated PvP and mythic keystones, what I call the Big Three. As always, these essays are long-ass opinions and are by nature biased and wrong and free to tear down at every opportunity. But believe me when I say that I want professions to be better and more fulfilling and more fun, which is a vague platitude, I know. I'm going to break down my two angles as to why professions aren't in such a great spot, and then I'll get to the more fun part, introducing ideas and concepts to take these on. By the end, I hope that you'll understand why and how I want professions to feel like a long-term investment with a lasting payoff with a place among the Big Three. And once again, no, this is not going to turn into a thing on player housing. I've gotten pretty skilled at avoiding the subject. One of the hallmarks of World of Warcraft is its accessibility. You want to be a warlock? Cool, go ahead. Go to the character selection screen and be a warlock. And if you, as a warlock, want to be a blacksmith, you probably shouldn't, but you can. Would you rather be an engineer? Sure, sounds better. And if you want to be both? Sure, go for it. And if you do change your mind, you could always switch. All good things. They contribute to the identity of our characters and it colors them with a bit of personality. Or does it? A warlock who is a blacksmith is the same as a warrior who is a blacksmith, at least in terms of what items they can make. The difference is that obviously the warrior blacksmith can craft equipment they can use, while the warlock blacksmith made a pretty bad decision. In this case, identity is added, but in a negative way. It's a quirk more than a plus. Even without restrictions, there are clearly bad decisions players can make when it comes to their profession choice, notably between these armor and weapon crafting professions. I find that to not be very well thought through when there are only good and bad decisions as opposed to good and great decisions, which I'm going to try to get to when I start presenting ideas. I should also point out that players can make no decision as well, to choose not to have a profession at all, and they can still be successful at whatever they do in the game. that's good. I don't think anyone wants their profession choice to decide a group spot anywhere outside of like the most competitive spaces in the World of Warcraft. And the not so subtle outcry asking for profession perks to return is arguably, to me, it's one of the most asinine of any of that I've heard, and I've heard all the arguments. Think about how it was back in the day, expending that much time and gold and energy into what was basically a glorified gem slot. I know I'm coming off as a bit cruel on that subject, but that's how desperate WoW professions were to feel like a part of our character, and that design is Blizzard's fault. But let's get back to profession identity. The lack of it is especially apparent on more populated realms. To players who can craft consumable goods, they just craft it the same way. Even when recipe ranks were a thing, it didn't take much for people to be at the same skill level. Today, there's very little sense of specialization. No one who crafts at greater efficiency or higher quality. Everyone's the same, with the exception of crafting those legendary reagents. I'm not so fond of the loftiness of leveling each individual crafting recipe, but I do consider this as a good example of how one player can be a cut above the rest, or at least unique with their specialization. This gives a sense of identity on a given realm. Oh, like, oh, that one person, oh, they can make a rank 4 of every leather piece. That's a clear demonstration of that player's effort. Accessibility with professions, though, is a double-edged sword. The ease of reaching max level risks making it meaningless, because everyone can do it. Making certain recipes too difficult to obtain or power up, it adds identity and maybe a little bit of fame, but it also risks alienating players who don't feel as welcome. With the second point, I'm going to dive right into it. The idea of crafting powerful weapons and armor is all but lost in Shadowlands. Today's endgame with dungeons and raids and PvP and even outdoor world content like world quest rewards have left virtually no room for crafted gear. Actually, I'll rephrase this whole thing. Armor crafting professions in Shadowlands have been reduced to reagent vendors. And that's hella sad. But even before this, armor and weapon crafting have, for the most part, played second fiddle to good old RNG. The discussions on this and similar topics have been exhaustive. Many have said that the best gear should come from the hardest content, that rewards should be relative to difficulty, that the casuals should never get gear as good as the top players. Why should they get gear as good as ours when they only do low-level content? Well, we've been there, all right? But they do have a point. Because crafting in WoW didn't just become this way, it was almost always overly simplistic, from learning recipes to gathering materials, managed by bind on pickup items until recently. This is the system we understand, and it just kind of sucks. It's odd hearing some complaints over professions throughout the years, such as having to gain reputation with a certain faction to get a recipe. I think back to Battle for Azeroth, where we would learn to make a rank 1 PvP set from a trainer, but higher rank recipes are learned from a PvP vendor using marks of honor. Never mind the fact that not everyone PvPs, why is a non-crafting activity involved with being more proficient at crafting? But anyway, back to gear professions and the big three. What I'm trying to get at is that with WoW professions in their current state, gear crafting professions are in an almost hopeless situation. The crafted items are either useless, as most of it is right now, or it would encroach on progression, as in it lets people skip progression via crafting, which is apparently bad somehow. I know I said that this next part, where I introduce ideas and such, is the fun part. But this is actually one of the more difficult things that I've written lately, because the ideas that I have about making WoW's professions better involves an almost full revamp of how professions work. So it's going to be next to impossible to get you, the listener, to really be on board with my grand design. I'm going to try my best though, so clear your mind of everything about professions and WoW that you know, except I guess the names of these professions, and don't consider all of these ideas as this complete package. Take each one and consider if it's compelling, or if it sounds fun, or if it needs tweaks, or if it sucks, of course. If I had my way, I would take the efforts that go into expansion features, from Azerite gear to the artifacts to the covenants, and put all of that work in design and art and programming and engineering and animations into professions. After all, professions are like the OG expansion feature, like a crate full of things to discover and make and farm for and trade and collect. It's a feature that's governed by the players and the economy. I figured that there would be a lot of comments railing over how much work would need to go into revamping professions, and well, here's where that manpower could come from, so there we go. Me making it sound so much easier than it would be. Go armchair dev speak, and let's move on. We'll start with something kind of easy. I didn't address this earlier because it's easy, but it sure sucks, right? It sure sucks that a lot of consumables, as in food and potions, were rendered ineffective in Shadowlands, right? All those recipes and materials and consumables that were saved up no longer have any use. I've heard a number of ideas, and I think that the following works best. Past the recommended level, reduce the effectiveness of the potion or the food buff or whatever by 40 to 60% depending on the item, or increase the consumption rate, like using the item will consume 2 or more of that thing. And that's basically it. Making them almost unusable is far better than making them actually unusable, right? As for some of those items that have no equivalent in Shadowlands, I think Blizzard doesn't think it's as big of a deal as we presume it to be. After all, we still have goblin gliders, for now. Now let's get to the riskier ideas and re-envision profession identity in the world of Warcraft. Earlier I talked about a warlock who was a blacksmith. That's actually a true story. I was a warlock and I chose blacksmithing, whoop-de-doo. But how about we flip this around and instead look at a blacksmith who was a warlock? The perception changes just a little bit, and I'll explain more. Yes, this is a blacksmith who makes armor that, as a warlock, they cannot use. I really don't want to get into anything too crazy like, oh, a warlock can wear plate if they are the blacksmith. That sounds really cool, but that's not the direction I'm trying to go. But what this warlock blacksmith can do is create class-specific pieces of gear, such as a main hand, an offhand, or a trinket that other blacksmiths can't make because they're not the same class. And throughout all the crafting professions, we can see these craftable items that can only come from a certain class. All of these are bind on equip, of course. This is not meant to force players to roll a certain class and profession combo. This isn't meant to make some newfangled meta where a player feels compelled to make 12 blacksmiths, one of each class. It's just to encourage a little bit more identity between players of similar professions but different classes. Let's actually use a better example. We have a shaman, a paladin, and a warrior. All 3 of them can wear shields, and all 3 of them happen to be blacksmiths. All blacksmiths, regardless of class, can create some generic shield, whoop-de-doo. But each of the shield-wearing blacksmiths can make special ones, particular ones. The paladin's crafted shield can give bonus block percentage. The warrior's shield gives increased block value, while the shaman's shield is enchanted to, randomly make the next cast use no resources or something like that. Let's get to one other example, an alchemist who is a rogue. All alchemists can craft invisibility potions. Cool. But the rogue can also craft a greater invisibility potion that lasts like a few seconds longer, which may or may not be worth it. But having that little bit of difference seems pretty cool. These are examples, obviously, but the aim is to give professions a sense of identity thanks to the class that you chose. This can be expanded in different ways, such as race. Maybe a certain cosmetic set can only be made by a blacksmith or a tailor or a leather worker or a whatever of a certain race. Another massive revamp for professions involves how recipes are learned. How do we learn these things? We're used to mostly learning recipes from stuff that drops from the ground, or from a trainer, or obtaining reputation and buying it, or anything that I missed. That worked just fine for over a decade, and I find it boring and unimmersive and uninspiring in their implementation. Back in the days during Mists of Pandaria, there existed a profession system called Discovery that was most heavily used in alchemy. When the alchemist crafted something, there was a chance that they would learn a new recipe. I thought that was pretty darn cool because it felt organic. I, as the alchemist, evolved, not because I just dumped gold into some trainer, but because I kept crafting. I think the idea of discovery can work with all the crafting professions, and we can make this system really, really deep in its implementation. So let's pretend, all right? Let's pretend that we're in vanilla WoW all over again. We're low level, we're blacksmiths, we're awesome. We learned the basics from a trainer, cool, but they can only teach us a few things and that's it. The rest is up to us. Only this time there won't be any recipes that necessarily drop or have to farm rep to obtain. In this example for blacksmiths, new items, which I'll refer to as training materials, will drop from mobs who happen to be using metal weapons or metal armor. One of these items, as you know, going further into this example, one of these items is a damaged, caved-in copper breastplate, and this can be examined by the blacksmith, and it'll give a chance, a decent chance, but still a chance to learn a recipe based on copper. Since you're low level, if you happen to pick up a caved-in thorium or dark iron breastplate, well, you won't be able to examine that until your profession level is high enough, and you might find yourself with a small number of these training materials that you cannot learn from because either you're too low level or you already learned everything. And let's assume that you can only hold a maximum of 10 of these items at a time, regardless of the type. I'm being very arbitrary here, but for a reason. The good thing though is that they're not bind on pickup, and you can sell these on the auction house. And other players can buy these up to progress into their profession without having to be out in the field. So this helps fulfill the fantasy of being a career crafter who never leaves town. But there is a little caveat. Since these materials were found by someone else and then used by you, the chance of discovering a new recipe is going to be much lower. This approach to learning does a couple of things. It makes training for recipes parts of the player economy via these training materials and trading them. This also opens up both accessibility and exclusivity to higher end crafts. Top teams will have access to the top recipes first because, well, they're getting to those tough bosses earlier. But those same top teams will also have these training materials piling up, and what better place for them to go but the auction house? This compels a kind of trickle-down effect from top players to the not-so-top players and career crafters. There can also be other recipes with hidden requirements, or, as hidden as can be considering data mining and fan sites. Let's use Shadowlands enchanting as an example. Disenchanting items that drop from the 4 Covenant zones has a chance to randomly drop unique training materials. These let you learn the 4 weapon enchants which already exist, each of which have a theme based on the 4 Covenants. And once you learn all of them, then your next use of these training materials has a chance to learn high-level chest enchants. So we can have this web of unlocks that can go as deep as the imagination allows, including how to unlock appearances, or pets, or weapon glows, and more. One of the more fun and frustrating parts of consumable-based professions throughout WoW have been skill ranks, notably with cooking and alchemy. I feel that skill ranks serve a purpose, but they shouldn't be locked behind like a recipe. Instead, they should be powered up through experience, similar to crafting the legendary reagents in Shadowlands, but to give perks instead, like a decreased cost or additional items made, that sort of thing. But on top of that, I buy into the idea of mass crafting, like potion procs and such. It's not unlike the notion of getting into the zone. Like, I think of the days when I had a job making coffee, and on really busy days, I'd be, cranking out drinks out on the espresso machine and pulling shots and steaming milk with a certain rhythm, right? It's like you're almost in a trance. So with crafting, I figured that while making items, there's a chance that you'll hit this rhythm, a temporary buff that makes you craft faster, or have a chance to make additional items, or use even fewer materials, which I guess is the same thing, right? But when that buff procs, you're going to either go nuts with the crafting, or you'll spam trade chat, like, OMG, whisper me and I'll craft like a bunch of stuff. Or people would be calling for somebody who has this rhythm buff, and they'll tip big for a massive order that they'd like to put in. We can apply the ideas of skill ranks and experience to crafting any kind of gear, when I only touched on learning the recipes themselves. Using Shadowlands as an example, as a blacksmith, I can make this ceremonious blade, an item level 100 weapon, which is pretty pathetic. Now imagine if, like legendary reagents, making these ceremonious blades grants experience in the craft, and eventually unlocks a higher level version of it all the way up to a certain point. It's just going to cost more if you just use the pull down and choose, instead of rank 1, you make a rank 20 or something like that. But it can be that simple. Here's another idea. When crafting these pieces of gear, secondary stats are randomly rolled. We're used to that. So how about including skill ranks that unlock all of the possible stat combinations, but these recipes have a cooldown, or again, an increased material cost to offset the control that you now have. Higher end recipes will have a higher starting item level as well as a higher maximum skill rank. In the interest of not encroaching too aggressively on the big three, it would be a good idea to limit how much crafting experience can be learned in a day or a week to curb extreme behavior by people with a lot of capital. There can also be a daily or a weekly cooldown of making these top end items. So the idea is that by tweaking with cooldowns, experience rates, levels, material costs, and more, we can create this path towards designing a crafting system that does in fact let a player deck themselves out in the best gear, the highest item level. It just takes an incredible amount of time and resources, and the season will probably be close to ending. With a crafting system this involved, it would be fair to make this system at least somewhat alt-friendly. So think of this idea. All the recipes that are learned from training materials, as I mentioned earlier, can be learned account-wide. The skill ranks and the ability to customize secondary stats, that'll still need to be worked up again, but this at least will get you started if you happen to roll a new character on another realm, or if you dump the profession and pick it up again. We're sort of winding down on the ideas. I've talked a bit about crafting and consumables, but not so much with gathering. In the world of Warcraft, everybody can fish, but apparently not everyone can pick up plants or rocks or peel the hide of creatures. And I would like to see the world of Warcraft give this a semi-realistic approach. Like if you gave me in real life a skinning knife and told me to skin some dead animal, you'd probably get like pieces of a dead animal and not much hide. So why not apply that sort of logic to World of Warcraft in place of the current gathering professions? Now, gathering is still going to be a profession. It's very easy to understand and it has some clear benefits. However, everyone is going to get a new secondary skill called Basic Gathering. With this, anyone can skin or collect herbs or mine for materials, but they only know this at a basic level. So they'll gather at most 40 or 50% of what a true gatherer can obtain. I can see this as both a quality of life change, a way to stay engaged with the game, and it adds a little bit of social interaction / frustration. Just imagine someone tapping that mob that you wanted to skin, knowing that they're doing it poorly because you're gonna see and hear blood splattering about while they're skinning. That would be like the mark of a basic gatherer trying to skin. To summarize, World of Warcraft professions need the sort of overhaul that just can't fit into a single armchair dev video, but I'm grateful that you tried to follow along to the very end. I feel like professions are being strung along and could be so much better with some inspiring ideas. I guess as a call to action, I want to hear an outcry from you folks, from players on Twitter and on forums and elsewhere for Blizzard to focus on the original expansion feature, professions, and go absolutely wild with it. But I'd also like to hear your thoughts and ideas here in the comments. Share your thoughts. Talk up other profession systems from other games, or make me shake my head with your discouraging doomspeak. These talks are always fun to do, and with your help, I can continue doing them, so please hit that like button if you enjoyed yourself. Subscribe to the channel for more commentary and all things Warcraft. Consider becoming a valued patron, and if nothing else, come by next time. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.